Good evening. This is John Martin, the host of The Voice of Reason. I'm with you tonight with my cast of characters. I have Dr. Garbinian, Chris Kirk. You want to be called Robert now? Robert Konich. We are not well organized, but we can talk a lot. As a matter of fact, I was responding to a comment that somebody made about us old men talking on TV, like old men didn't have any ideas or anything. And so we don't just complain, we pose the problem, which sounds like a complaint, and then we pose a solution. We've done that a number of times. I want to give the audience an example of what I'm talking about. I have posed many arguments about the school department, and I have somehow become an expert over the years, since the 1950s. And I used to teach too. I taught naval enlisted people how to shoot missiles. That's my favorite thing. But what I've learned over the years is that the problems that we had when I moved here 20 years ago still exist. They're not just creeping up on us. They were there when I moved in, and they're there now. And what would that be? Special education and school department has been a problem because those students don't perform well. How did I become an expert? My child was a special education student. And I didn't know anything about special education, but they told me they couldn't teach him. Now this is the hard way to start, but they said they couldn't teach to him. And so they were complaining to me like I could unravel the puzzle. And so I went out and hired an expert, English expert, and they came to school, they observed what they were doing with my son, and then she made some pointers to the teacher of what she could do to help reach my son. And then we got down to the bottom line, the test. Usually it's weekly. The bottom line of that test, the hardest question had 20 knowledge factors in it. My expert says, not only is it hard for special education students to handle 20 different facts, nobody else in the class could handle 20 facts either. So she got the test passed to the special education teachers. I think there were 3 in the building, and they rewrote the question, broke it up like in 3 questions, maybe 5 factors each, and lo and behold, from that date on in the 3rd grade, that's where my son was, he never failed a test. Not ever again. And I thought, if that's all you have to do, is go in and teach these people how to deal with test taking, how to deal with special education students. And so I didn't have time to teach everybody in the entire school system, but I would just want to surround the solution around my son. And so I can say today, they never changed the model for special education. They still have, if you're a special education student, you get maybe 3 stops with a special education teacher a week. I remember when I went to visit school, they had a special education teacher come in and stand next to my son, and he couldn't get anything. They were looking for a paper they had started and didn't finish, a certain color. Say, look for this color paper. Now, he didn't have the type test that was underneath it, underneath. He was sitting on his desk. It was a chair test. And so he got on his hands and knees and he was pulling out papers. Even the special education teacher couldn't find the dang thing. So they started the lesson without him. See, all bad. It was bad technique. They should have never stopped in the middle of a lesson to begin with from before, and then they should not have started again unless they saw the paper on everybody's desk. And so we worked from there. And I can tell you that special education is now my little check mark in my head. Anybody want to talk about that? I can talk forever. Now, do any of you old guys have any old stories you'd like to rehash of how you got the wisdom in order to solve current problems? Start with you, Charlie.
Well, I suppose a lot of things do come to my mind, John, in terms
Just
of...
one. Just give me
You
one.
just want one. Well, that's the difficult part, just choosing that one. But one of the things that came up in terms of budgets several years ago, this is 2019, so this has to be, I'd say, early and mid-2000s. And essentially it was this one thing that occurred that has propelled me to get in the, I'm going to say, in the public eye, quote unquote, and start talking about what is happening. But at that time, it was, I'd say, in March of the year, and it was that part of the budget cycle where the finance committee was going over the school budget, and the superintendent of schools at that time was not pleased with what they were recommending. And I was home on the television. I just happened to come on this meeting on television. It was just by chance, and I said, it caught my interest. I said, they're talking about the budget. I said, let me listen for a while. And this superintendent made a statement saying that if they didn't receive more money, the money that he was looking for, the SAT scores would decline. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if MCAS was in full swing then, MCAS scores would decline. And it was like a dictum that he just laid out, some of this great discovery, and that I almost fell on the fly. I said, what? How does he know that this is going to happen? And that motivated me to say, let's examine this mathematically. Mm-hmm. So that put me on a little task that has since blossomed into many, many repeating tasks of the same nature, where I managed to obtain SAT scores of any town that or city that I wanted to in the state of Massachusetts. And I looked at their per pupil expenditure, the total per pupil expenditure, because that is broken down into subcategories. But I took the total, and I did a little, what they call linear correlation coefficient test, mm-hmm. to see if there was anything mathematically involved between these two factors. And I first did it for the 8-town Assabet Valley district. Nothing. You always get, as I explained before, you always get a number. You always get a correlation coefficient. But the question is it significant? And the answer was no. Then I proceeded to take subcategories of how much we spend on students. In other words, in terms of instruction, in terms of guidance, administration, all these subcategories, I think there's like 8 subcategories, and correlated those with SAT scores and the 3 arms of the SAT, the reading, the writing, and the math, and then also the MCAS scores. It kept on coming up with no correlation at all, which essentially proves that there's no cause and effect between how much we spend and how well the students do. And I've repeated that. So it's a problem that has come up before in the past, John. How many times have I kept on doing this and come up with the same results? And I imagine I'm just waiting for our next override issue to come up. I don't know when that's going to be, but we'll do it one more time, mm-hmm. to see if if anything has changed. And that's my little story of having a problem and solving it mathematically.
Yeah, you're the math guy.
Well, we try. We try, John.
Any comments, Chris?
What I've learned to help me with problem solving over 50 years. Here with the town. Well, two quick little stories. One is I went through the public schools here in Shrewsbury, and I think it was like in the 8th and 9th grade, I first started to crash into algebra, and I found it completely incomprehensible. You know, I felt I felt about algebra the way your special ed sons felt about English and so forth. It was like, do this unless this happens, and then do that, and then do this, and break this in this situation, do this, and then in that situation, do that, and there was no rhyme or reason. You just had to figure out which case it was, and then follow this incomprehensible, pointless procedure to get the answer. And if you were able to classify your problem correctly, you and apply the right solution, you would get the right answer. And it was just total gibberish to me. I was just totally lost. And so finally, I think it was like when I was a sophomore in high school, yet another year of algebra, and yet another year of just, if it's this, do this, if it's that, do that, and if it's this, do this. And finally I said, I can't, this is just terrible. So I went to the public library, got some math books, taught myself math from the basics up, and I spent like a year teaching myself, I got a book on analytic geometry and calculus. So I spent a year teaching myself, working through that book, every example, page by page. And by the next year, when I was a junior taking geometry, I sat in the back of the class. Because by that time, I had taught myself mathematical logic, calculus, analytic geometry. So I could just do all the problems, like, just bang, one right after the other. So I have been through the situation that your son has been through, on a different subject at a different level. But I have experienced the bad teaching, which is just present. It's sort of like you go to a restaurant and they put food in front of you, and they don't really care whether you eat it or not, or whether you like it or not. It's just there, and if you eat it and pay for it, that reflects well on them. And if you don't eat it and don't like it, well, tough. That reflects on you. So the other thing I was going to point out was that over the years, I would hear, I don't know whether, I'll say it anyway. I would hear the superintendents of school repeat the same list of gripes, one after the other, about why they needed more money. One was competition from charter schools. Another one was special education costs too much. Another one was that the per pupil expenditures were too low in Shrewsbury compared to other towns. And so finally one day, I decided to look into just one of these subjects, which was the per pupil expenditures. How much we were always at the bottom of the heap, really bad compared to any group that you looked at. We were at the bottom of the heap. We were terrible. So they would have so-called comparable towns, and I okay, let's look at the figures. So I would say, make a graph of how much each per pupil expenditures, and some little tiny town, Berlin, had spent a lot of money, and Shrewsbury spent a little bit of money per pupil expenditures. And then I looked at enrollment. Berlin had a little enrollment, and Shrewsbury had a big enrollment. So I said, I wonder if those two things are related, because the two graphs crossed each other, and I thought they were almost straight lines too. So I thought, I'm thinking of Charlie and his drawing graphs and correlations and so forth. So I said, let's look at these two things. So here is enrollment versus per pupil expenditure, and it was almost a perfect straight line, which meant that the smaller the town, the more the per pupil expenditure was, and the bigger the town, the smaller per pupil expenditure was. Which means, for example, if you have to spend $100,000 on the salary of a high school principal, in Berlin, where there might be 5,000 taxpayers, everybody had to spend $20. They all had to chip in $20 for the principal's salary. Shrewsbury, however, might have like 20,000 taxpayers, so they only had to chip in like $4 apiece. And that is why we were paying less and Berlin was paying more, not because not because they loved their children more, but because there were only a few people to pay the bills. And Shrewsbury paid less per pupil because, not because they hated their kids or didn't care about them, but because there were so many taxpayers to split the bill. And so after that, that also opened my mind, my eyes, because if they were not being entirely frank about per pupil expenditures, then maybe they weren't being terribly frank about special ed spending or charter schools or other things. So that made me skeptical. And I've noticed that they don't stress per pupil expenditures quite the way they used to when they're scolding us for being cheap. Anyway, those are my two.
Well, the big sports analogy that I like to use is you're only as good as your weakest link. And when I was going to school, I would actually befriend the special education children. They're sitting alone. I'd go sit with them. And I'd like to make a good shout out to some of the businesses, Shaw's, Stop and Shop, that employ some of these special ed people that basically now have, they like to give them labels, of course, now, whether it be ADHD or autistic. So you find a lot of the people working at Shaw's and Stop and Shop, they do the bagging or the carts. And I'm the first person to say hello to them. And I always have been. So I think the more you normalize things for these children, the faster they're going to be able to assimilate. If they get picked on, they go into a shell. And we talked a little about this, relating to Andre. And I asked John today, I said, did Andre get picked on? Because that's something that kind of happens to people in special ed. Especially people don't understand it. The kids, want to point out differences. So he really said he really wasn't. And I was happy to hear that. So I recommend people, if you know somebody that does have a little learning disability, be their friend. Reach out to them. Help them normalize their lives, because that way you're bringing up from the bootstraps your share and becoming, raising up the level of everybody by doing that.
And it doesn't cost any money to do that either. All it is just a very easy act of kindness. That is all.
Yeah.
I'd like to react what Chris had to say about learning math. The problem is that math is not taught in a logical way. It is taught in a very disjointed way. The ideas are not ordered in any logical way in a book. And when it is taught, it just said, as you say, when you see this, you do that. When you see this, you do that. Well, yes, that's true, but why? There's a logic to that. And if students can understand the logic of it, they really can. And even at a young age, they can understand why things work. You have to explain it at maybe a lower level, maybe not as with all the finesse as you would at an upper level at an older age, but it can be explained. For instance, when I was in the 3rd grade, we learned how to multiply numbers. And we learned what multiplication was, that it was successive addition. Now, we didn't have calculators in those days. In fact, when I was in 3rd grade, we didn't even have television. So it shows you how far back we're removed, okay? So when we learned how to do multiplication, I can distinctly remember having to repeatedly, and this is something that we don't do anymore, is to repeat things, to illustrate why 5 times 3 was equal to 15. We had to write down 5 plus 5 plus 5 equals 15. And then we had to write down 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 equals 15, and actually talk it out and show it out to the teacher. So we knew that what multiplication was. It was nothing more than repeated addition. Now once I learned multiplication was, then we learned what division was. These are all definitions, and that is exactly
check and balance system.
That's exactly all it is. So we learned what division was. We learned that 20 divided by 4 equals 5, because 5 times 4 is equal to 20. Great. And then finally, the day came when we tried to divide by 0. How much is 3 divided by 0? How much is 0 divided by 0? And I can remember her in the 3rd grade explaining to us why that was true, and it was so obvious. But I would venture to say that if you just took a random sample of, let's say, 30 people over at Shaw's right now, or over in Dunkin' Donuts, you ask them how much is 3 divided by 0, they would say 0.
Well, I remember bumping into a graduate student in biology, and he said, I still don't understand the law of distribution, that 2 times the sum of 1 plus 2
Right.
equals 6.
And that's the easiest thing to understand.
He didn't even, you know.
And they don't understand that that distribution is called a postulate, and it's assumed condition. It's assumed to be true. And that's part of the structure of mathematics, that we do have certain things that are just obvious. It's called obvious truth. But that's easy to understand, because if you read any type of legal document, such as the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, it says, we hold the following to be truth. Well, that's an assumption that all men are created equal. And all these rights that we have, those are assumed conditions. Who says that's, so mathematics is the same way. And it should be pointed out that way. If it is, young people can learn it. But unfortunately, it's not done that way.
No.
And that's where the teacher has to come in and change things.
Yes, it's a skill and an art.
Yeah.
Not always well practiced.
No, it isn't. And the teachers have to know it. If the teachers don't know it, how can they ever pass that along? And I believe that's true, not just in mathematics, but in any academic discipline. There's a logic to every academic discipline. And
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for airing out.
I'm sorry.
Why don't we talk about the traffic today?
Safety and traffic, sure, my big topics. I love safety and traffic. One of the big things, I mean, I grew up in the Boy Scouts, and safety was number one. In fact, I'm going to a reunion for the Boy Scouts at Camp Resolute in Bolton, Massachusetts, next Saturday. They're bringing back all the Eagle Scouts for the last 20 years or so through, not 20 years, 100 years. Whoever they can find that wants to show up for this thing is going to be interesting. But when it comes to Shrewsbury safety, you have the east-west corridors. And that's really, you've got 3 major thoroughfares going through this town: Route 20, Route 9, and 290. And anytime there's an east-west road, in your sunrise, if you're going east, you're going to get that blinding sun at some times of the year. Same thing at sunset going the other way. So you've got to watch out for that. And now we have all these new light patterns. New lights have been put in on Route 9, down on South Street, Lake Street, Oak Street. So you really have to watch those. And one in particular, the Lake Street one, has a special arrow for people turning now.
Oh, yeah.
And I constantly see people blowing through those arrows even after they turn red. And I've heard a bunch of accidents up there due to that already. So please stop when there's a red arrow. That means stop. That doesn't mean keep going just because you're in a hurry.
I think that they have better signage on that.
You might be right on the signage,
And they
yeah.
have to have a sign, a very large sign above the signal, that this signal is for left turn only. And when it is red, you stop.
And the one there too is I always see people going through no turn on red, no right on red.
That happens everywhere.
Everywhere.
That happens
That's
everywhere.
constantly being ignored
Yeah.
these days. They just look to see if there's no traffic, they go.
There it is.
Well, the speed signs are being ignored. Everything is being ignored, really.
Yeah.
I mean, 40 miles, and I think some of the speed speed limits that we have, some of our roads are way too much. If you look at Maple Avenue, that's 40 miles an hour coming up the hill from Route 9.
Yeah.
And to me, that's thickly settled, but I see other streets in town, it says thickly settled is 30 miles an hour. And I look at how many homes there are, and how close the homes are, and to my eyes, it's the same.
Thickly settled, yeah.
And I heard one person in town told me that, he's in the government, he says that the way the state sets these limits is that they go out and they look at a flow of traffic for a certain amount of time, and whatever the average speed is, that becomes the speed limit. And to me, that is absolutely illogical. I should think that the speed limit would be something that is dictated by the condition of the road, how wide it is, the curvature of the road, how many homes there are coming up Maple Avenue. Do you realize how many crosswalks there are?
Yeah.
Especially when you get to the top of the hill, there's like 2 or 3 crosswalks going down to the school. Doing 40 miles an hour there?
That whole, right in front of Dunkin' Donuts, that whole area with the gas stations there.
That should be 25 miles an
Be
hour.
very careful. They should almost have speed bumps there. because
I know. They don't.
there's so many cars pulling in and out of that area.
I agree. I agree.
But when it comes to just relax, don't rush. I know a lot of people want to get places. They're late. They're rushing here, but I encourage people just to not have any road rage. Go slow. Respect other people when they see them pulling out. Let them merge.
merge.
Let them get it in there. Don't just ride somebody's bumper so no one can get in there. You have to let people merge in. And the fact that somebody hits somebody from behind happens all the time because they're following too close. Whether they're on their cell phones or on their, it's unbelievable what you see now. You're driving down Route 9 right next to somebody, and you see them just flicking through their phone, seeing what's on Facebook, seeing what's on Instagram, what's on the internet. So hopefully the issues that they have, some of the legislation they have in the state is going to pass both sides of the House and the Senate, and we're going to finally get some legislation out of this to ban cell phone usage without being hands-free. And hopefully that's going to come down sooner
Now,
than later.
if in that legislation, does it give what the penalties are that if you break that law? Or
I
is
believe it's a $100 fine right now
Okay.
for texting and driving.
Yeah.
But I know Westboro definitely enforces it a lot more than Shrewsbury does. But it needs to be enforced a little more.
Yeah, if I stand in the center of town, I see the first driver, the second driver, the third driver.
Depends if they're left or right-handed, right?
Another example is that if you're at a red light and it turns green, they don't move.
Yeah, they're looking down on the phone.
They're not even looking at the light.
They think it's okay to do it at a red light now because we're not moving.
Even if they have the hands-free phones, I think that's still a distraction. It really is, because your
Mind.
is
Is somewhere
not
else.
on where it should be,
Yeah.
and that causes the accidents. That is for certain.
Anything for the last 2 minutes, John, or you want to talk about the space program real quick? The 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 is this week.
Yeah, it's on TV. I guess it'll be on more than one night. There's a lot of shows concerning space and the progression of it. But I saw a show the other day. It was kind of interesting. There was people that were saying that we never went to the moon because the equipment they left behind, you can't see it. So they said, well, if you can't see it, it's not there, you never went. So they got an astronomer on the show, and he says, well, even the best telescopes we had, you can never get enough definition of the picture to identify anything on the moon.
Not something that small.
Right, that's the point. Now they're going to build one something like 8 times more powerful than they have now. It's going to have hexagonal streams. They're going to make a big one, and then they're going to make bigger telescopes into space. We have one up there now, but now they're going to build one that's even more definitive. They want to look at gas pockets way out there and see stars forming and be able to identify something about it so they know more about our own star. And of course, I don't think we can wait for it to blow up, just like everybody thinks. But the show is almost done. I thank everybody for watching, and we'll see you next month with a new show with the same old faces.